Is the OPD in full swing in Nimhan?
Uh, well, it has started, but where in child, for example, we used to see about
Yeah,
150 families a day. We are now seeing
yeah.
about 30 to 50. And overall in the OP, all the departments put together, if we were seeing about 3,000, we are now
Mm.
seeing, let's say, about 500 or 800.
Skeleton.
Yeah. And as you know, the national language of Nimhans is Bengali.
Yeah, like Shobha used to say, oh, Bengalis and Kerala, these two people come. And she said, why do they come? I said, because it's like a, you know, darshan. It's like a Tirupati darshan. Yeah. So Bengalis are going now? I don't think
Uh,
so.
they're slowly starting, but
Oh,
not as much because uh, since you know the rates of hypochondriasis
yes.
in your state.
Sir belongs to our part only, so he knows all.
Arnav, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, kindly open the participants link,
Mm-hmm.
but not make the Facebook Live now. Hold for 2 to 3 minutes. Open the participants link. Many people are waiting there.
See, it is already open. They have to register and they can join. Or if they registered early, they just put the
The email ID.
put the
Email
button
ID.
registered. Exactly.
Yes.
चढ़ो.
Very good morning, Gautam da. Can you hear us?
গৌতম ডবল
Yeah.
ছবি হয়ে যাচ্ছে ভার্চুয়াল ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে একটা তুই বসে আছিস
কখনো কখনো আউট হয়ে গেলে তখন ওইটাই প্রক্সি দিয়ে দেবে আর কি
So all set to go? Kaustubh?
Yes.
Arnav?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Just wait for the signal.
Srikumadda?
yes I am ready
Okay, fine. Arnav, start Facebook Live now.
Just wait for 1 minute.
Waiting.
Arvindji, you just start the Facebook leg and give us a signal.
Okay, sir. Okay.
two devices close one other
Yes, sir. We are live now, sir.
Okay, good morning to everybody. Welcome you all to the 6th edition of Sunday Samvad, an initiative by IPS West Bengal State Branch. Today, we have amongst us Professor Shekhar Seshadri. Professor Seshadri needs no introduction. He is a senior professor in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Unit of Nimhans, Bangalore. Professor Seshadri will be speaking on parenting, the new 16 parenting factor points to consider for nuancing parenting in consultation context. Today's session will be chaired by Dr. Swagata Sinha. Dr. Sinha is attached with Manovikas Kendra, Kolkata. We have amongst us Dr. Gautam Shaha, President-elect IPS National Body, Professor O.P. Singh, Honorary Editor, Indian Journal of Psychiatry, Dr. Sri Kumar Mukherjee, President, IPS West Bengal State Branch, and Dr. Ranjan Bhattacharya, immediate past secretary, IPS West Bengal State Branch. So with these few words, I invite you all to join this session and listen to Professor Seshadri's deliberation. Thank you. Over to Sri Kumarda.
Good morning, everybody. This is the 6th edition of Indian Psychiatric Society West Bengal State Branch endeavor, the Sunday Sangbad. And this Sunday, no other than Professor Dr. Shekhar Seshadri will be speaking on parenting, the new 16 parenting factors in consultation context, nuances in consultation context, and the whole program will be chair will be Dr. Sagata Sinha and be moderated by Dr. Ranjan Bhattacharjee. And I take this opportunity on behalf of IPS West Bengal State Branch to welcome you to get involved in this program, and in the process get informed and knowledgeable. Thank you very much.
May I request Dr. Gautam Shaha, the Vice President cum President-elect of the Indian Psychiatric Society, to start the proceedings and say a few words.
It's really great to have a speaker like Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, especially when he speaks about the child and adolescent psychiatry. Today we are lucky to have him with us. And parenting is a very critical thing. Everybody should understand what is parenting, how to parenting. Not only for the general people, also the psychiatry, not for the patients, for us also. So thank you so much. I don't want to take much more time. And over to Ranjan, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Very good morning to all of you who have joined. So today we have with us the guest speaker, Professor Shekhar Seshadri, who is no introduction, as mentioned by Kaustav, is a professor of Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, NIMHANS, Bangalore. So he has geniusness and versatility over many factors beyond the academics. So as we all know that he has graduated from Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi, 1979, and he has done his diploma in psychological medicine from NIMHANS in 1983 and MD in psychiatry from the same institute in 1985. He's also the senior professor and associated dean of behavioral sciences, and he has lots of acquaintances and attachments. Especially, we are in Kolkata. We are very proud to have him, who attached previously with the Antara. Apart from the Antara, the other institute he had affiliated in past in various capacities like Central Institute of Psychiatry, Institute of Mental Health, Amritsar, Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences, PGIME at Chandigarh, State Medical Health Institute, so on and so forth. So he's a master and great analyst of performing arts per se. He has special interest on learning on human predicaments, behavior in a particular situation. The Mindkind has gone through lots of challenges during the pandemic days, and he had made a series of talks which are available in YouTube. Many of books to his credit, especially the Parenting, the Art and Science of Nurturing, co-authored with Nirupama Roy Madam, and also the Play Experimental Methodologies in Development and Therapeutic Settings. We have with us the chairperson, Dr. Sagata Sinha, who has received her training in psychiatry from Calcutta University and NIMHANS, Bangalore. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist who has been associated with Monovikash Kendra, Kolkata, a rehabilitation and research institute for individuals with intellectual disability and learning disorders. Her areas of research are autism spectrum disorders and ADHD. She has more than 100 publications in these areas in peer-reviewed journals to her credit. So without much ado, I'd like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Sagata Sinha, the chairperson, to start the ball rolling. Over to you, madam.
Good morning, everybody, and very warm welcome to all of you who are present. Today we have an eloquent speaker, Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, who needs no introduction. So as Ranjan has given you his brief bio, I'm not going to take up much time. I will welcome him to begin his talk. Over to you, Dr. Seshadri.
Thank you very much. Shabbaike Shubprabhat, Namaskar. Asha Korchin, Apni Shabbai, secure, safe, and in reasonably good cheer. I'm very honored, not only with this invitation, but the fact that my dear friend Shogota Sinha is chairing this session, and Ranjan's very kind invitation to begin with, Kaustav, who started the ball rolling, Shri Kumarda. Thank you very much for your kindness, but especially to recognize O.P. Singh, who has always been exceedingly receptive to many of the suggestions that I came to him with in terms of the journal. And of course, Gautam Da, who is the incoming president of IPS. What a singular honor for us and to Paschim Bengal that yet another luminary is going to take over as the president of our society. Now, I want to locate what I want to share with you this morning in two contexts. One is that over the last 40 years that I have been in this profession, and as I am due to retire in 11 months from now, and retirement, of course, is a very Indian concept. I find that I'm at the peak of my energy, and with all these new initiatives, and there is so much more to do, particularly with the pandemic and this business of 27 crores of the samples of vaccine that are going to come. Of course, what's going to happen to the other 100 crore of the Indian population is a different question. And so the context I want to speak around is essentially two. One is that in the practice of clinical psychiatry, whatever the disorder may be in child psychiatry, the extent to which we look at parents and parenting and the kind of challenges that they go through, whether it's internalizing problems like anxiety, adjustment problems, trauma-related issues, or externalizing disorders with challenging behaviors, as in conduct disorders and attention deficit hyperactivity, oppositional defiant, or whether it's juvenile onset, very serious psychiatric conditions. It could be OCD, it could be mood disorder, it could be juvenile onset schizophrenia. What do parents actually experience? What are the questions in their mind? What are the processes that they go through? And what is the extent to which our postgraduate education really addresses this kind of approach and history taking in the whole preoccupation that we have with our ICD-11s and our DSM-5s and this reductionist approach to the practice of clinical psychiatry. So this is one part of the issue. The second part, of course, is COVID and what COVID has done to the whole ecology of our lives, both external ecology and our own internal ecologies. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And as I'm addressing this, I can see that my dear friend Vinod Sinha has already put down on the chat the issue of parenting during lockdown due to Corona. And are there special challenges? Has parenting changed? Does it need to change? Let's say for children with special needs or for adolescents who are already restless with the whole shrinking of their social spaces. And what has happened in Corona, if you really look at the loss experiences that children have had, loss of routine, loss of structure, loss of predictability, loss of educational opportunities, loss of social spaces, loss of peer interaction, and loss of play. And how do we basically wrap our heads around this loss? So this is the context. One, a re-examination that all of us need to do about the nature of the clinical practice of child and adolescent mental health, the nature of the training that we go through, and the kind of issues in parenting for children with different kinds of problems. And Shogata Sinha would know, working with Manovikas Kendra for so many years, what it means to have a child with disability and the kind of predicaments that they go through. What does it mean to have a child who has severe disability? I must share with you one thing that was stunning when I did the Parenting Pathshala series as part of this new initiative that I have started, this national initiative in integrated resource for child protection, mental health and psychosocial care, supported by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. And Jo Chopra, who runs Karuna Vihar as part of the Latika Roy Foundation in Dehradun. And when we were speaking about what happens after us, and she said something very remarkable when you look at this whole issue of social supports. She said there is no point in building a social support of people who are the same age as the parents, because they will also go when you go. What you need to do is build a support system of younger people, people who are nearer the age of your adolescent or your young adult with disability, and create a kind of friendship and a support system with that group, so that 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, when you are not there, these are people who would be healthy and of the right age to be able to provide the kind of support that your adult with disability will have. And parents choose to have children, you do so with an expectation that you will have a healthy child, and you know, when the child ends up having a chromosomal disorder or a metabolic disorder or a neurodegenerative and a progressive disorder, what does it do to their own narrative and their own construction of their lives, their expectations, their hopes and anticipations, their dreams? And what is the extent to which our training gears us to actually address the kind of loss they go through, the loss of an ideal child? So this is the context that I want to present to you. And I will now introduce you to this rather old construct, which many of you may be familiar with. You remember this old 16 PF, it's 16 personality factors. If you look at people, men and women, parents, what kind of people are we? What kind of parents are we? In our parenting, if you look at these descriptors of the low range and the primary scales and descriptors of high range, and these are some of the items, as parents, do we bring warmth into our homes? When we're doing clinical assessment of home atmosphere, whatever the problem of the child may be, between parents who are kind of reserved by virtue of their own temperament, you know, a parent who himself or herself is shy, anxious, quiet, doesn't talk much, as opposed to parents who are warm-hearted, caring, and attentive to children, to children's play, to children's stories, to their experiences. If you look at reasoning, emotional stability, how dominant are you? How lively are you? How rule conscious? The kind of social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. One would say that if you look at descriptors of high range, one of the things that clinicians would perhaps need to do in discussions with parents and parenting is to bring into homes activities, experiences, conversations, and play which are based on warmth and attentiveness and a bright atmosphere, adaptive approaches that and forceful and assertive does not mean in a negative sense, but in terms of the animation that you bring in of enthusiasm, that you have certain structure and you're explorative and creative and alert and vigilant to what kids are doing and their lives, and you're imaginative and you're discreet about their privacy. You are watchfully expectant, you're watchfully vigilant, you're open, and you have you allow your children to be self-reliant and respect their individuality, and through your own behaviors and demeanor and deportment, how organized you are. So this was the old 16 PF. It's actually measuring personality in an individual. But what I found remarkable here is how you can extract from a scale which has by now become obsolete. Nobody even speaks of 16 PF these days, that it's got relegated into some historical archives and nobody really looks at this. But this is not the 16 PF that I want to speak to you about today. I have put together 16 factors that I would like to bring to your attention. And these are as follows. And I call them the 16 parenting factors, which Ranjan and Sri Kumar Da actually referred to. The first question that I ask you, my friends, and the first question that you may perhaps need to put to many people who come to your consultation chamber, your consultation context and your clinic is really to understand what is the motivation for the need to be a parent. And this really is predicated on a more fundamental question. If you're heterosexual in orientation, why do people choose to marry? Why do people choose to be a parent? Does it happen by virtue of tradition? Does it happen by accident? Is it a choice that you make? Is it a choice that you make because you wished to have a child for motivations that have to do with the whole tradition embedded in patriarchy of this transgenerational that, I will have a child, he or she will be bright, do well, settle down, and, when I'm old, I will be taken care of. I mean, is it a business investment? Now, many of you, including our dear chairperson, have children who are not even in India. They are all in America or UK or perhaps in Europe. That so what connections are we talking about then? Or is it that the motivation to be a parent is actually to rejoice in the growth of this individual and where he or she travels and what he or she becomes? That so it's not about you, it's about the celebration of that individual. That so the extent to which we embrace the identity and the individuality of the children that we produce, it has nothing to do with our security. It has nothing to do with our tradition or the kind of social forces that compel us to get into, parenting. Everybody expects that, if you're heterosexual, you ought to get married and you ought to have children. ये तो चलता ही रहता है. This is culture, this is Sanskriti, this is parampara. And, you also fall into the same routine. Or is it more than that? Are there philosophical motivations too? About life, about sustenance. Now, in a business family, the motivations for the need to be a parent may be very different. Because who will run the family business? Who do I leave my enormous resources and money to? Motivations for the need to be a parent. And if the motivations are sound, and if they are embedded in principles which actually celebrate the identity and individuality of the child, then irrespective of what problem the child has, your inner response to the child's anger, the child's stubbornness, the child getting into trouble is not one of anger and resentment. So would you then come with a premise that no matter what happens, no matter what difficulty you get in, I want you to know that you are my child and I will always cherish and love you? Or do you put conditions on the quantum of your love based on how ideal that child's behavior is? Factor one. Factor two. What are your ideologies about parenting? Now, this is very curious because some people say that my father and mother brought me up this way, therefore, I will also bring up my children this way. Or, my father and mother brought me up this way, therefore, I will never bring up my children this way. Now, ideologies about parenting presuppose that you develop notions of who children are and what childhood is and what is ideal parenting. So between control on the one hand and freedom on the other and a balance in between, this whole business of how permissive should I be, how much should I set rules, and how do these ideologies actually develop? Where do they come from? They don't come from outer space. They come from our own childhood experiences. They come from our expectations of our children. And so these ideologies are themselves a process that. On the other hand, these ideologies may start with a rigid base which never changes, irrespective of who the child is. And if you have one child or two children or three children, not all of them are exactly the same in who they are as individuals. They differ in their temperament, in their gifts and proclivities, in their aspirations, in their demeanor and deportment, in their approach to life. So it's very curious that sometimes these ideologies are very rigid and inflexible, and sometimes these ideologies go through process changes, based on the life cycle that a parent himself or herself goes through and commensurate with the life cycle that the child goes through. That The third factor is core beliefs about childhood, about children, about your children. How is childhood constructed? Is childhood constructed on the basis of a notion that children do not have an agency? They are not thinking beings. I need to create rules, regulations, structure, and expectations, and they will automatically fall in line. And as they reach adolescence, are your core beliefs about your 14-year-old, your 16-year-old, your 18-year-old, that they are essentially incapable of responsible choices? And I therefore have to be far more vigilant, far more controlling in their choices, their behavior, and their mobility. Is that the kind of core belief systems that you come from? This, in turn, is structured on how childhood is depicted and the extent as practitioners how much we are taught other than some basic child development and the various domains of child development, but the construction of childhood itself, whether you look at Piaget or whether you look at other developmental psychologists. And interestingly, in our academic teaching, while we are taught about Piaget, we read a little bit of Freud, but we don't read Jung as much as we read about Freud. We don't read Alice Miller at all. And where developmental psychology is concerned, we do not read Kohlberg or Vygotsky as much as we read about Piaget. Let me tell you about these four people, about Jung, about Alice Miller, about Kohlberg, and about Vygotsky. Jung spoke about the concept of the divine child. Now, do any of us believe in our core sense about the divinity of childhood or the concept of the divine child? A child born with a core of basic empathy. Let me digress a bit and give you an example, a story. Some years ago, in a pavement in Bangalore, which was uneven, I kind of twisted my ankle and sustained a ligament injury. I got an MRI done. It was a fairly serious one of those third-degree ligament injuries, and the orthopedic surgeon said that it needed to be immobilized in a cast for 3 weeks or so. It was immobilized. I had a walking stick as well because I needed some support, and I had to go to the OPD one day and on the first floor. And I go to the OPD and the door opens, and there is this colleague of mine standing many years who looked at the walking stick. The vision went down, looked at the cast and said, what happened? So I said, pavement, ankle got twisted, MRI, third degree, orthopedic surgeon said, put it in a cast. And my colleague's response was, okay, bye. I go to my consultation chamber, my friends, and there is this 9-year-old girl with moderate intellectual disability. Shogata will love this story. 9-year-old girl with intellectual disability, chronic, poorly controlled epilepsy, and 10 minutes before I had entered the chamber, she'd had a seizure. And you know what an acute seizure could do in terms of, okay, so 9-year-old, moderate intellectual disability, chronic, poorly controlled epilepsy, and 10 minutes before I entered the room, she'd had a seizure. She takes one look at the walking stick, and my caste nudges her mother and says, "Mummy, doctor को क्या हुआ मम्मी? मम्मी डॉक्टर से पूछो ना दर्द हो रहा है क्या?" And I started crying and wept. Because to me, the divinity in this child, which my colleague who said, "Okay, bye," and this 9-year-old with intellectual disability and seizures had such a sense of someone else's pain. So this is what Jung meant when he spoke about his concept of the divine child. Alice Miller, who wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child, and she's written biographies of the childhood of many prominent individuals, speaks so eloquently about childhood and particularly about difficult childhoods. That, we sometimes believe that childhood is a breeze. Children are carefree and careless, and nothing matters, and and this whole notion, मेरे बाप ने भी तो डांटा था मुझे, उसने भी तो झापड़ मारा था. I turned out okay, didn't I? That so it's quite all right that these kind of core beliefs that we have. That now the issue is very simple. That look at it in terms of the narrative structure and the drama of a child who goes with a report card to the parent, and the parent looks at the report card, looks at the child, looks at the report card, looks at the child, and just shakes his head. Nothing is said, but a lot is conveyed. Or a parent who looks at the report card, looks at the child and says, "I'm disappointed with you." Or a parent who says, "Tu kabhi nahi sudhrega." या तू कब सुधरेगा? तू कभी नहीं सुधरेगा. तू निकम्मा है. तू बावर्ची बनेगा. As though there's no dignity in being a chef or a cook. Or worse still, why are children like you born? We speak so much about physical abuse and sexual abuse. Emotional abuse has never been a concept that is focused on in postgraduate psychiatric training, nor in the consultation practice, or what is the kind of conversation and dialogue that actually plays out in homes. Vygotsky spoke about social constructivism, which is that families and classrooms are a collaborative community where we co-construct knowledge. And Kohlberg, of course, this whole theory of moral development or moral reasoning, which he presents as dilemma. So what are your core beliefs really about childhood, children, and your child? Factor 3. Factor 4, acknowledging the personhood and the agency of the child. Your child is not just your child. Your child is a person, an individual. And one of the funny things is parents fail to re-establish adult relationships with their children when they grow up. This term adult child, my adult child. What do you mean adult child? He's not a child, he's an adult. There's no such thing as an adult child. And it's funny, isn't it, my friends? You could be 55 years old. You're getting your 25-year-old daughter married, but to your 85-year-old father, you're still an idiot. So when will you acknowledge the personhood and the agency of the child? Is this child an important member, a contributing member of this family? how much of agency, choice, how much do you consult your child? Or is your notion ki, this kid is 7 years old, why the hell should I consult him? How does his opinion matter? As opposed to creating a atmosphere and a scenario at home where you acknowledge the personhood and the agency of your child. For those of you who attended the IPS specialty section on child psychiatry yesterday, I referred to these two constructs. They are called goodness of fit and continuum of caretaking vulnerability. If a child is anxious and parents are also anxious, bahar mat jao, surakshit nahi hai, kitne baar bola ki nahi jana chahiye, that's not a good fit. For an anxious child, you need relaxed parenting. It's okay. You can go ahead. I'm around. You can come back and check with me then. For an exuberant, overactive child, if there's a lot of noise level at home, a lot of control, that's not a good fit. For an exuberant, overactive, somewhat cranky, somewhat angry, somewhat stubborn child, you need to create a somewhat calming atmosphere that, you're calm in your approach that. So how do you look at this goodness of fit? Because if you don't look at it, what happens in the continuum of caretaking vulnerability is that a child's problem can get amplified as, we go along. Relationships which are based on a culture of conversations rather than on expectation, instruction and control. होता क्या है इस फैमिली में सुबह से शाम तक? Shogol theke bikul bila. What is the kind of relationship? And the unfortunate truth is that in most families, there is no culture of conversations. There is expectation, instruction and control. Adesh, Updesh, Tarpore Upekha. No culture of conversations. कि टीवी के सामने बैठे हैं, बातचीत हो रही है, ये था, ऐसा था, वैसा था, तुम्हारी, what's your राय, तुम्हारा अभिप्राय की, what do you feel? I see, and giving importance. बच्चे के अभिप्राय को मान्यता और मुख्यता देना. So the child also feels valued. And let me tell you why the whole notion of value is important. Some years ago, one of the areas that I work in is, as you all know, is trauma. I'm deeply concerned about adverse childhood experiences and trauma. I've also have deep interest in suicidality and suicidology. And I've often said in a, Shogata, just as a small clarification, it's 9:45. For how much time should I speak and how much time should I leave for Q&A and all that?
15 minutes for Q&A.
Okay. So I can go on till about 5 past 10, 10 past 10?
Yes, sir. Absolutely okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. For a young adolescent or an older adolescent in a difficult situation, in a situation which is a predicament, wo vidambana mein hai. The phenomenology of suicidality is between a person who says, I'm in a difficult situation, my difficult situation is intolerable, I do not wish to live, I wish to die, and I wish to kill myself. They are not the same. They are dimensions in the process of suicidality. And the reason I'm mentioning this in the context of a relationship based on a culture of conversation, rather than expectation, instruction, and control, and the whole notion of a child's sense of personal worth and value is when we did this quasi-formal research into 100 young individuals who had attempted suicide. Upwards of 90% had at some point of time in their lives heard or experienced a response from their parents which devalued them. Just with their report card example, तू कब सुधरेगा, तू कभी नहीं सुधरेगा, तू निकम्मा है, you're a useless fellow. Because that's what they internalize. And at some point of time, when push comes to shove, the whole idea, I wasn't valued anyway. You know, what is my worth and value as an individual then? Now, parents sometimes say this out of anger or out of disappointment, but you do not realize in the whole context of emotional abuse, the belittling and the devaluing of an individual, the kind of pernicious impact that it has on their psyche and the way they process their notion of value is because parent-child relationship is so structured on expectation, instruction, and control that there is really no culture of conversations. Right? Okay, I had expectations. You tried your best. So effort is not recognized. It's only outcome. Outcome is more important than process. Performance is more important than effort. And this paradigm shift or change is something that we really need to discuss with parents in the consultation context. Polarization of rearing functions. When we assess families in consultation, who decides what kind of parenting will be done by the father or the mother? Again, I'm coming back to the kind of issue, for example, that, Shogata, in developmental disability, why is it that the burden of caretaking often tends to fall on the mother? What is the father's role? Now you may argue that ye grihani hai, she's not a working mother, and I'm working, therefore all the caretaking obligations, including handling severe challenging behaviors. And in kids with severe or profound disability, the bathing, the feeding, the cleaning, the soiling, the biting, the banging, everything has to be. And how do we therefore look at tiredness and burnout? And this becomes so critical, when we look at the parenting experiences that, what about the other siblings? How much of time are you giving to the other siblings? What is your social life like? How burdened do you feel? How often do you have to face challenging behaviors? What kind of stress do you feel? And if you look at the scale that my friend and colleague Satish Girmaji has developed, it is called the Family Assessment Schedule. It was called Family Interview Schedule. It was called FISC-MR, but now it's called the FAS. Dr. O.P. would be interested to know. It was published in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry many years ago. And I would be happy to send Paschim Bengal IPS a copy of the scale. It is one of the most fantastic scales to use in a clinical setup to assess families and parenting in the context of a child with disability. Interestingly, friends, we've used this even for children with externalizing behaviors and with anxiety and so on. So while it was developed for disability, it has fantastic use even in children with emotional and behavioral problems to really look at parenting experiences and family experiences. So what are the kind of stresses that they go through and what are their coping mechanisms? that they go through. So family assessment schedule, Girmaji et al., Indian Journal of Psychiatry. I would urge you all to look at it, and the article that was published in Indian Journal of Psychiatry also gives a table in which the entire scale is given. That wonderful scale to use. It's a simple scale, and it's a very short scale, and it'll be wonderful to use in these. So polarization of rearing functions. ये मेरा काम नहीं है, ये आपका काम है. मेरे पास समय नहीं है. And how does this polarization take place, and who decides that? What is the position on discipline and punishment? And it again comes back to the original question that I asked about parenting ideologies. Do children need discipline? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. I mean, everybody needs discipline. Do children need disciplining? Should the disciplining be through punishment? And should the punishment be corporal? So what is the position, or what are parenting positions on discipline, on order, on compliance, on punishment? And how do parents respond if an expectation is not met, on performance, on boundary violations, on rule breaking? The kid has fought with someone and pushed someone, shoved someone, hurt someone. How do you position yourself? What are the inconsistencies in disciplining? And this again relates to polarizing or polarization of rearing functions, that मैं भी बचपन में ऐसे ही चंचल और नटखट था. After all, लड़का है, सुधर जाएगा. So inconsistencies across parenting figures and inconsistency in one parent across time. For a higher misdemeanor, because you're in a good mood, you let go. But for a lower misdemeanor, you're really harsh. So this kind of inconsistency is really confusing for children. And part of what is done in consultation context is the child comes with oppositional behavior, or with aggression, or with stubbornness, some externalizing symptom, is to actually sit with both the parents and check how each of them have responded, where that response comes from in terms of thinking and processing. And can you then bring in consistency to say, don't confuse the child, that you must come through as consistent and in agreement with the kind of approach that you take to the parents. What does over-involvement mean? And how do you distinguish between involvement, over-involvement, and intrusive parenting? Let me therefore come back to the whole COVID, online education, screen time, smartphone, internet gaming disorder, pornography. कि कमरे में बैठ के कर क्या रहा है? What is he doing? Who is he speaking to? Who is she speaking to? What is being posted on Facebook and on social media? Is it appropriate? Is it inappropriate? Now, these are all legitimate concerns and anxieties. I'm not taking away from the legitimacy of these concerns. But sometimes between caring, concern, interest, involvement, over-involvement, and intrusion, again, there's a range. Caring, concern, involvement, over-involvement, and intrusion. The dividing line is not that sharp. So the extent to which you recognize the privacy and independence and individuality of your child becomes very critical to keep in mind, to decide and calibrate how you actually interact with your child and the kind of involvement in their activities, their friendships, their time on social media, the kind of posts that they are doing. Special positions. You'd recall that by virtue of disability, sometimes we use the term special needs, that, but it's also about, you know, your firstborn or your lastborn, or the son who was born after 3 daughters, or but also about how good things happen when this child was born, or bad things happen when this child was born. I'm sure IPS Paschim Bengal people share with me a love for films. I wonder if you remember a very old Bollywood film with Sharmila Tagore and Tarun Bose and Dharmendra. The film is called Anupama. The one in which that "Dheere dheere chal chal, ae dile bekarar, koi aata hai," that one. When Sharmila Tagore is born, the mother dies in childbirth, and Tarun Bose, who plays the father, was so intensely in love with his wife that he always held her responsible for the death of his wife, and therefore never spoke to her. And she grows up as this very silent and withdrawn person till Dharmendra comes in her life, and special position. How you attribute certain qualities to this particular child that puts the child in a special position of marginalization and exclusion, or a special position of entitlement. And let me tell you how this works in a clinical context. Let's take a very simple clinical presentation called breath holding spells. Many children have, breath holding spells. They cry because of hunger or discomfort or pain or fear. And then, there's a breath holding spell. It could be cyanotic or non-cyanotic. It could be associated with something that looks like seizures, but it's not necessarily seizures. About 20% of kids with breath holding spells could also have seizures. Some well-meaning person says, "Isko kabhi rone mat dena." So you indulge the child, and you indulge the child more, and you indulge the child even more. And then at the age of 8, you bring this monster to Shogata Sinha saying, "Madam, sambhala nahi jara, itna ziddi hai, he's so entitled, I can't handle this kid, impossible to handle." Breath holding spell, special position, parenting change, because somebody said, "Isko rone mat dena kabhi." And then and so you have this 8-year-old monster to deal with that. So the kind of positions that children hold in your life, and the difference that makes, alters parenting in ways that people are not aware of. You fall into that pattern, and then suddenly you find yourself in a situation where you seem to be responding, your parenting responses come from having imbued that child, or having given that attribution to the child of that specialness, either in a positive way or in a negative way. And this is something that one needs to be cognizant of. Relationship power and parenting patterns. The whole operation of patriarchy and how traditional family systems function, particularly where there is parental discord and the unfortunate theme of domestic violence. Now, parental discord, harsh exchanges, accusations, and domestic violence are unfortunately sanitized as a personal problem. ये इनका personal लफड़ा है, it's a personal problem that. And from a public mental health perspective, we have often been saying that to call domestic violence a personal problem, it's an individual problem, इनके घर में होता है, is a sanitized version, because domestic violence is not a personal problem. It's a public problem. It's a public mental health issue. It's your issue. It's my issue. You remember the Bell Bajao campaign? If you know that domestic violence is taking place in the neighborhood, don't say this is not my issue. And Boman Irani was, hired to basically, Bell Bajao. You may be shut up and say, you mind your own business and who are you to interfere, but at least ring the bell. So what happens in the privacy of families and how parenting patterns and relationships and power actually plays itself out within families is something they will never tell you in a consultation. You have to gently get into these narratives to understand how do relationship patterns actually play out in families. How is power asserted? Who takes the decisions in this family? How are these decisions taken? What is the basis of those decisions? How do you handle disappointments and challenges? The challenges of having a child with disability, the challenges of having two children with disability. And we've had very many families that child was born male, intellectual disability, fairly some stuff, maybe you thought I'll have another child, and then you bring the child and testing Fragile X. So 2 children, both severe to profound disability. One of them, including locomotor disability, severe spasticity. It's a severe manifestation of, though one may argue that, in Fragile X, you may not have that kind of, but it was compounded by seizures and that. And, this family brings them from, Chhattisgarh all the way to Bangalore in a train because they can't afford a flight. 24 to 36-hour journey, bringing them that. And sometimes I wonder ki, I wish I had parents like these. Never gave up. It's so easy. People abandon children because it's a girl child, a child with disability, a child with some dysmorphic features or congenital you abandon children, you traffic children, and you induct children into labor to supplement the family income. And these are people who never give up. Or the challenges and the disappointments when a kid doesn't do well, and the kid has severe learning disability, and how do you handle your disappointment because the kid is otherwise bright, and how do you communicate that disappointment? किस तरीके से व्यक्त करते हैं उस disappointment को? Are you able to do it in a balanced way and how do you look at the nuances of this kind of communication? And affirming language versus emotional abuse. And that's what I meant when I said कि कब सुधरोगे तुम कभी नहीं सुधरोगे, तुम निकम्मे हो, तुम नालायक हो, you will never come of any good. I am disappointed with you. Now, the use of this language, how conscious are you about the dialectic, the conversation, the words, the language, as opposed to a report that is not good, but to say that, you tried your best and, I saw you working very hard. It doesn't matter. I'm quite confident with who you are and the value you bring to this family. How is it that a report card from the school to the parent only says English 70, Hindi so and so, mathematics 16 in red, and those those three dreaded words in the report card? You know what those three dreaded words are? Can do better. Can do better. It's a dreadful kind of. But it never says your child is very good with younger children. Your child is a great organizer. Your child is an extraordinarily gifted artist. Your child sings so well. Why do we reduce the status of a child to that of a student? Good student is equal to good child, therefore bad student is equal to bad child, but a child is not equal to a student. A child is a son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, cousin, niece, nephew, Indian, Bengali, Rabindra Sangeet singer, loves Hilsa, hates Pabda, and a student. So how do we affirm the identity of the child in his or her range of behaviors, gifts, rather than get into this kind of language that. And finally, this whole notion of a failure as a parent. And in the clinic, when you're speaking to someone and the child has a serious issue, what is your own subjectivity that do you feel you failed as a parent? And do you castigate yourself? Do you get into that negative state that you're casting yourself in the role of a failure? And what are the success experiences that one has as a parent? So these are the experiences that will really help parents re-establish adult relationship. If you go through these 16 factors, as this child grows from age 4 to age 7 to age 13 to age 18, and then into this 21-year-old, to then go out of the family, have you taken the child through a life cycle and a process of being and relating that re-establishes an equal and egalitarian adult relationship? So that is what I wanted to share with you. And now I will get out of slide share. Thank you very much for your attention. These were the 16 parenting factors on a twist around the old 16 PF personality factors, an obsolete tool. And I hand over to you now for any discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
There are plenty of questions. And I think we should answer Vinod's question first. I mean, parenting during the pandemic. That was the first question that was asked.
I feel, Vinod and all my dear friends, that challenges that have occurred and how to deal with it can be addressed in a very simple response. If children cannot go out into the world, how can you bring the world back into the family? And I've been speaking, I spoke about Jung and Alice Miller and Vygotsky and Kohlberg. I also want to speak about Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner was an Austrian philosopher who propounded anthroposophy. And anthroposophy is that branch of philosophy that deals with the optimization of human potential. And anthroposophy is practiced as the anthroposophic practice of medicine, the anthroposophic practice of education, and these are the Waldorf schools, the anthroposophic residential communities of adults with intellectual disability. And this is the Camp Hill community. The only Camp Hill community in India is in Bangalore. Some of the international Camp Hill communities have 20, 30,000 adults with intellectual disability who live in the community, and they have civic responsibilities. They can become a mayor, they take decisions. It has a lot to do with nature, with art, with craft, with music, with movements. It's called eurythmy. So anthroposophy means you bring the world back during COVID into the family. And for very young children or special needs children, it's about even giving them a pot with sand or mud, throwing a couple of mustard and coriander seeds, nurturing the plant. It germinates in 3-4 days, and the excitement that the child feels. It's about putting 2 chairs and putting a dari over it, putting a blue light over the bulb, and making some orange juice, playing some Hawaiian music, and imagining that you're on Hawaii near the beach. So it's about discovering new routines, and because of the loss of routine, so you basically build new routines and a new culture of conversations to handle the challenges that COVID has really placed on parenting experiences and then parenting issues. Over to you, Shogata.
Yeah, so so somebody is asking about if your child gets into criminal activity and addiction. I mean, how do you handle it?
I want to also say at this point of time, and I have put on chat. I know that on the Zoom platform there are few participants, but on Facebook Live there are many. If Ranjanda can somehow put these links that I have put on chat here, can copy these links and put on the Facebook. Particularly the link nimhanschildproject.in. If you look at the section on training and scroll down to judiciary, you will see a couple of our manuals which address this whole issue of children in conflict with the law. What I want to say, Shogata, in response to this question is that no child, there is no such thing as a born criminal. No child no human being is a born criminal. And we call this as pathways to vulnerability. Pathways to vulnerability. And there are several pathways to vulnerability. Some of them is because of undiagnosed ADHD and impulsivity. Some of it has to do with experiences of neglect and abuse in the family. Some of them have to do with role models, including a poor role model at home and peer pressure. Some of it has to do with learning issues and dropping out of school. School, Shogata, is the safest place for a child to be. And the worst thing you can do for a child who is problematic and who has a learning problem is to suspend him from school, because then you're ensuring that he'll be in the company of other dropouts and get into. I want to digress at this stage and make a very important point. The Juvenile Justice Act was changed in 2015 after the Nirbhaya episode. And people often say that this 17-year-old was the most cruel of the lot. Is that the truth? Or was it a trial by the media? It has now been established that that is not true. So what is the truth? That he was staying 80 kilometers out of Delhi and had one parent with untreated mental illness was dysfunctional. Is that the truth? That he was in school, had a learning problem and was punished by the teacher and dropped out of school. Is that the truth? That he came to Delhi in search of a job to basically send money home and support because he had 2 younger sisters. Is that the truth? That he was in regular contact with the family, sending money home, cleaning tables in a roadside eatery. Is that the truth? that 4 months before the Nirbhaya episode, he was befriended by these group of people who ran the transport business, lost contact with the family. Is that the truth? Where was the Juvenile Justice Act when this boy was in need of care and protection? JJ Act has two components: children in need of care and protection and children in conflict with the law. Where was the JJ Act when this child was in need of care and protection? My point being that every child in conflict with the law is or was a child in need of care and protection. Therefore, the Juvenile Justice Act, of course, Nirbhaya was involved, but I'm gobsmacked when I sometimes think that the Juvenile Justice Act was changed because a teacher hit a child. If that teacher had not hit this child, he would have never dropped out of school, never come to Delhi. This incident would, I mean, his involvement in this incident would not have happened. So that's the way we look at children who come into conflict with rule, this rule breaking and boundary violations. So if you look at these two manuals in the training section and judiciary in nimhanschildproject.in, you'll get a lot of information of how to evaluate and how to respond to these people. Over to you, Shogata.
Yeah, so there's another question which I think a lot of Indian parents would want to know is that how to tell the child about changes during adolescence, the sexual changes, and how to explain to a child about good touch and bad touch. Parents find it very embarrassing. So how to do it,
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, Gautam here. It was an excellent presentation. Especially, I like that you have explained that from the parents' part, care, concern, involvement, over-involvement, and inclusion. That is a really good. But I think it differs from age to age. What is the age of the kids?
Right.
That is an important thing. How do we deal? And next one, we are actually facing every day in our clinical practice that patient with those who have conduct disorder or dissocial personality disorder, sometimes it is a really very much helpless condition of the patient, parents. So what will you suggest?
I will try to link Gautam Das' question with the question that Shogata put just now, because they're kind of related issues. So I'll try to relate them and address them. Now, before doing that, I also want to say that again, in the same link, nimhanschildproject.in, if you look at the section on interventions, not on training, the children in conflict with the law is training judiciary. If you look at the section on interventions in adolescence, there is a whole set of stuff that we've done on life skills that Shogata, this conversation and indeed the issue that Gautam Da has raised relates on the one hand to a culture of conversations, on the other hand to a methodology we use, and we call it as the window method. So when we table the whole issue of sexuality, and there is an issue of discomfort that this discomfort is because of the language. I mean, even when I did my internship in 1980, and a small posting called family planning posting, where all these things were, all this Gupt Rog and Rahasya thing was discussed. And my deepest apologies to the entire Paschim Bengal Samudaya here. The doctor who was running that clinic, his name was Dr. Nirodh Banerjee, whose parents had obviously named him before Hindustan Latex started manufacturing condoms. So I found that the ability to converse comfortably. So the window approach means you start with relationships. What are different kinds of relationships? You talk about emotions in relationships, the different kinds of love. Then you speak about attraction, then about boundaries, then about health, safety, privacy, and then you come to sexuality and intimacy. So there's a whole range of subjects by which how you can that. I often say, if you think information is a problem, try ignorance. How can information be more of a problem than ignorance? And a culture of conversation means that allow your children to ask questions. Your response would not be, kya bakwas ka sawal pooch raha hai? Where do you get all these ideas in your head from? दे अपना phone. कल से phone बंद तेरा. When the child is asking simple questions like, what is love, or what is attraction, or what is sex, or what is penis, what is vagina, why do we respond? It's a word. And the idea is to respond, simply and openly, so that then the child knows that I'm open to all discussion. Please note, I am open to all discussion, not necessarily to all behavior. Because uska context hota hai, age hota hai, and these are the parameters. And Shogatha, the point is, it doesn't matter whether you're 16 or whether you're 36 or whether you're 64. The same parameters hold. What is the relationship? How healthy, safe, consent, permission, boundaries, privacy, respect, the same parameters hold. So that's the way that one would approach it. Over to you.
Yeah, so then there are a lot of questions which I think all parents are asking about screen time. A lot of children going into a lot of screen time during this pandemic, and not only this pandemic, even in other times. So how does one handle it?
Well, this issue has been dealt with quite extensively, both by the psychiatric fraternity as well as the pediatric fraternity. In fact, I'm convening along with Kshitij Srivastav, who is the Secretary General of the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health, in a small committee consisting of Nidhi Chauhan, Rachna Bhargav, Nitin Gupta, and Shuruvi Patra. We are coming out with a set of guidelines for parents on screen time and mobile phone use. The first draft is already ready. And ICAM, as a professional body, will be coming out with it. We would be happy to float it through IPS, Child Psychiatry Specialty Section.
Yes.
And I will ensure that it comes to IPS Western Bengal also. But having said that, let me tell you what JAMA Pediatrics said. It said under the age of 3, no screen time. 3 to 6, 1 to 2 hours max, that too not continuously in 15 minutes. That 6 to 9, 2 to 3 hours, 9 to 12, 3 hours plus, and it's only the 13 plus who could do those 4 hours, 5 hours of screen time because of the online education and the whole COVID agenda that Vinod referred to in his COVID question on parenting. The other issue is, ye to online education ho gaya. There are 2 other issues that I want to bring to your attention. One is called processed experience and unprocessed experience. And what that means is a 3-year-old child in front of the screen just sitting and watching. It is unprocessed visual stimulation. Whereas if you're sitting next to the child and saying, wo dekho, pani pi raha hai, arey wo gir gaya, acha ho, kitna bada. So you're processing it so that the visual image is converted through language into knowledge and information and is stored. The last issue in response to this is, so there is a screen time as far as online education is concerned. But there is also peer interaction and social media and movies and how much of that is. And which is, it is in this context that we are coming up with a family plan. It's a family plan of guided and controlled screen watching. So there's an agreement in the family. It's a plan. We are not saying कि दोस्तों के साथ texting वगैरह WhatsApp में बात करना मत करो. We are not saying कि Netflix मत देखो, Amazon मत देखो. But let's have a plan of, and in that plan, home responsibilities, being in touch with the extended family, academic work, be in touch with your friends. So even if it means 15 to 20 minutes of non-screen time and actually spending time with the parents in face-to-face conversation, you keep alive the idea that my entire waking time is not occupied just with the gadget, that and the and the even when there is the gadget, it's not just about peer interaction or movies. It's also about education, and it's also about communication with the extended family. So that's how we would framework it. Over to you, Shogata.
So what's the role of grandparents in rearing children? Because a lot of people nowadays, both the husband and wife are working, they're leaving their children with their grandparents. So what is your take on that?
Well, it depends on whether a family is an extended family, or whether they're a nuclear family, whether the grandparents live or come and go and give their do taka ka gyan and go away, and their disapproval and so on. But often what happens in very large joint families, coming back to the point that I made about inconsistency in parenting functions and injunctions and inconsistency in disciplining, is that in large joint families, a child often ends up having four mothers and three fathers, all of whom have their own opinion and their own whims and fancies and individual style of. So one must not forget that it is the parents who are the parent, and you must take on their primary role. You can be receptive to other people's opinion and advice, but you cannot either abdicate or just give up and give over your role to other people, no matter how well-meaning they are. Having said that, there are many children who are actually brought up by their grandparents, because the parent, for purposes of employment or other such limitations, and so that's a different scenario altogether. So I think that the role of grandparents need to be seen in this kind of perspective, and put in perspective, so that where it is of use to an individual child, we structure it in a way that it contributes to the child's growth. But where it is basically divisive and conflicting, then one needs to take a appropriate perspective on that.
So there's another question. Please comment on the role of parenting to deal with losses experienced by children when parents are facing bereavement issues themselves.
This is quite a complex issue. How do children experience loss, particularly loss through, let's say, death of, and children can grieve even for loss of a toy, loss of a pet, loss of a friend, loss of a family member, loss of a parent, and so on. The way this is not to take away from the individual grief of the parent, but the equanimity with which you deal with the grief situation also works as a model. And therefore grieving rituals, or what is called as the regrief methodology, and some of these cultures are there, where you speak about the person that you have lost, and everybody contributes and says nice things about him, and you have ceremonies, and you feed people, you celebrate the memory, you speak about the good stuff that happened. So grieving rituals which are affirmative and not necessarily private weeping, sobbing, which is neither good nor bad. That's not the point I'm making. The point is that there are grieving rituals where you actually go through the grief process by some of these established rituals, which actually celebrate the role that the person you have lost played in your life. And that gets children to actually respond to loss experiences in a way that they recognize the pain in it, but yet they recognize the value that the person you lost brought into your life, and how being strong and resilient would be something that the person you've lost would actually cherish and acknowledge, were he or she to know of how well you're coping and dealing with it. So these are some processes. Also, it's interesting. We spent 6 years in executing this community project on child and adolescent mental health service, which is now culminated in this national initiative on child protection that I'm running now. And all these questions that you're putting have their place in this website, nimhanschildproject.in. So we have an entire section in the training manuals. One is on basic skills. The other is on loss, trauma, and grief. And the third is on children in conflict with the law. And then, of course, there's the section on judiciary. So you'll find a lot of this material on how to assist children in handling loss, trauma, and grief in this website. Over to you, Shogata.
Parenting in the last century and this century, a comparative study.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Parenting in the last century and in this century, a comparative study.
Oh gosh, I wonder whether COVID is going to make a difference in parenting in this century. That I think that I've done some historical study on childhood and parenting based on literature that is about 60, 70, 80 years old. I've also looked at some cultural practices of, I find it very surprising that there are reports 200, 300, 600 years old of how the safety of children and how communities would actually get together to sustain and maintain the safety of their children, and how children grew up in an environment that it seems to me that child protection, and I'm not talking about protection from abuse and exploitation, I'm talking about child protection as a philosophical construct where the identity and wellness of a child is protected and a child is allowed to grow in affirmative ways. That there has been a change, unfortunately, not in a very good way, of what has become to parenting. Now, this is not to engage in any kind of parent bashing, but I think that parenting has now become a very, very big agenda in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's the reason why, from Dr. Sanders in Australia, the Triple P program, and Kasdan parent management training, this was about 20, 25 years ago, that in the last 25 years or so, parenting has become a very major and a new agenda, because I think we lost the plot a while ago. We made assumptions that some of these things would come naturally. And as I said, if you look at the YouTube channel of our national initiative, and we did a series called Parenting Pathshala, I often say that I find it very curious that there is education and certification for every conceivable skill. Neil Ratan Sarkar Medical College, MBBS degree, Institute of Psychiatry, MD degree in psychiatry. But there are two things for which there is no education and no certification. One is marriage and the other is parenting. Two of the most major experiences. It's assumed that it will just come naturally and spontaneously. It doesn't come naturally and spontaneously. So I think we lost the plot about 25, 30 years ago. But the importance of parenting is being discovered now. And in fact, there is a very major group the world over internationally called Parenting Circle. And they have an India branch also. They're doing some very good work. They have a site where they're putting a lot of stuff on issues pertaining to parenting. And yes, over to you, Shogata.
I think the time is up, Posto.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yes. It's been a wonderful talk, and we have learned a lot from you, and you'll help us not only as clinicians but as parents. And thank you so much. I'm honored to have shared the platform with you. Over to you, Kosta.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sagotati. It was a nice session.
Wonderful
That was
session, sir.
specialty.
Watched by more than 350 people.
Lovely.
Great.
Really enjoyed. As usual, wonderful, sir.
Thank you very much.
Gustav, over to you for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Sheshadri and Dr. Shagota Sinha. I would have loved this session to go on and on because it is always a pleasure to listen to Professor Sheshadri. I, on behalf of the IPS West Bengal State Branch, would like to thank both the speaker and the chairperson and all my seniors in IPS. In near future, I would like to listen to Professor Sheshadri again on child assessment of child sexual abuse, because I listened to one lecture of Professor Sheshadri very long back ago. So I would like to hear it again, and that would be worth listening to. So I would like to thank the organizer, Sun Symbiosis, Mr. Arnab Ghosh, for providing the logistics. I would like to thank all the participants who have made this program successful. It was a wonderful discussion, and it was a very good learning experience for all of us. I as a parent also learned a lot of things from this session. So I wish all of you a great day ahead. Thank you again on behalf of Indian Psychiatric Society State Branch. Yes,
Kostata,
Yes, yes.
I have a suggestion. My suggestion is, since so many questions were put on Facebook, if you could compile it and put it together and send it to me, I would be happy to do a qualitative analysis of that and give it back to IPS West Bengal as concerns expressed by your fraternity, and it can become a very good source for the IPS West Bengal. I'm happy to do the content analysis of it if you could send
Thank you,
it on.
sir.
Sure,
sir.
sir. I will
Great, great.
Before leaving, Professor Dibbogopal Mukherjee is here. I would like to say something, Professor Mukherjee, sir. Fine. So, Arnav, dear Arnav, one request before leaving the platform, please copy all those questions and paste in a Word file so that we can send it to Professor Shekhar Sheshadri later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It will be done. Thank you, sir.